A full moon is shown in the sky above the castle. A man was visible in the window, lying his head on the table. The man asked what to do. The people would soon begin to starve and the Duke didn't care. He was doing nothing to prevent it. Something burning flew past the window. The man looked out the window with alarm. He peered out. The people below were fighting. His mouth opened in shock. The man exclaimed, "Is that really the Imperial Army?" He pictured a man wearing a crown. With a shocked expression on his face, he said it was Emperor Zaren. Burning cannonballs were flying toward the castle. The man saw a man on the roof. Leaning out the window, he called out to the Duke. A warrior with a sword stood on the roof. Hearing the request to flee from there, one of the projectiles hit the roof directly. The second flew toward the window with the terrified man. Flames erupted around them. With his mouth wide open, the burning man called out to the Duke. That's how the land of Bran fell. A useless patch of land on the edge of the empire. The boy jumped up in bed. He clutched his chest, breathing heavily. He, the local Duke's butler, had perished with him. The boy looked in surprise at the mirror, thinking more accurately that he should have died. Touching his face, the man in the boy's body said he couldn't believe he had become a duke. He had been reborn 20 years before their deaths. The boy sat clutching his head. A whole day had passed since he had been reborn into the body of Duke Eren. In a broken state and utter confusion, he hadn't eaten or drunk and hadn't spoken to anyone. Flexing his fingers, Eren screamed like a man. He spent the second day furiously cursing the emperor who had killed him and all the inhabitants of Bran, falling asleep and waking up delirious, pondering how to take revenge. Eren touched the mirror with his palm. On the third day, he finally calmed down and realized he had a second chance to make things right. His fingers touched a document on the table, and he had to bury himself in a book to learn everything about the Duke. Early in his life, he had decided to prevent the impending horror, and after a couple of days, endless hunger forced him to stop. His fingers clutched a loaf of bread. Holding it in his hand, Eren reflected that while he had spent his entire life helping the poor, who couldn't even afford a piece of bread, the Duke had never cared for anyone but himself, as if they weren't his subjects. Cheryl, Eren's younger sister and a former imperial princess, pointed and exclaimed, "Why is he doing this?" She had spent so much time dragging him out of the room so he wouldn't starve there, and he hadn't. Looking at her fearfully, the boy apologized, saying it would be easier to chew the bread this way. With a slight tilt of his head, Eren asked if she was free today and suggested they go somewhere. His sister frowned, asking where. The guys were standing in the dungeon. Rommel, the knight captain and unofficial swordsman, scratched his neck and said he'd ordered him to handle their food supplies, so why had he called them here in full armor? Eren's mouth dropped open and he said Emperor Zaren was planning to destroy them. The guys looked at him in surprise. Cheryl's eyes widened and she said that their uncle, the Emperor, had sworn an oath to their father. Why would they break it? Eren, wearing armor, explained that he was probably afraid they would use their right to the throne. And besides, he'd been personally informed of his plans to break his promise. Looking forward, the boy declared it was time to use the dragon's blessing. Glancing sideways at the man, his sister remarked that he'd wanted to keep him hidden until the very end. Eren crossed his arms and replied that he hadn't been concerned about the Emperor's betrayal until recently. The girl pointed her flower-shaped staff forward and thought it was very strange. Her brother never talked nonsense. A portal to the mountains opened before them. Rommel exclaimed in shock. Turning around, Cheryl asked slightly. He didn't know for sure. She hadn't told him. She was an unofficial mage. The guys stood at a cliff in the frozen lands. Stretch her arms. The girl asked not to judge harshly. She hadn't practiced for a long time. Cheryl raised her staff. A fireball flew forward. The mage moved the staff in a circle. The fire moved. Eventually, several fireballs were arranged in a circle before her. Rommel, her mouth open in shock, said that it was in fact a ring of inferno. With a wave of her hand, the girl sent the fireball forward. The fire obscured the mountain top. It was destroyed. The knight's mouth fell open in utter shock. Cheryl, with a fire in her palm, said indifferently that it was weak, just above the seventh circle. She was an unofficial seventh circle mage. Looking at her in surprise, the knight asked, "So, she's a seventh circle mage?" The girl replied, "Yes, but that wasn't enough to defeat the entire Imperial army." Touching his chin, Eren confirmed that it wasn't enough. They still had a long time to gain strength, and he thought to himself that the Duke's diary stated that she was a fifth circle mage, but in reality, she was an archmage. The girl waved her staff, saying that compared to her brother, all these things were mere toys. The knight turned to him in shock and asked, "Is that true?" The Duke drew his sword and said he'd find out now, and thought he'd try. He pulled out a page from the diary yesterday and thought about judging it. Touching his face thoughtfully, he explained that thanks to the dragon's blessing, his sister had become a fifth circle mage, and the Duke himself a grandmaster warrior. Clenching and unclenching his fingers, Aaron said that he too possessed that power. He walked over to the bookcase and took one of the books from it. Looking at the brown cover, Fundamentals of Imperial Swordsmanship, he thought. That's it. He couldn't become the best swordsman in the world right away. He'd start from the basics. Aaron raised his sword and stepped forward. Lightning appeared around the blade. Furrowing his brows, the boy shouted that this was the third version of the great sword art. Channeling energy forward, he unleashed piercing wind. A blue beam flew forward. It split the mountain in half. Dust rose from the destruction. Aaron put his sword away with a smile and thought he'd been aiming for the wrong mountain. But this would do. Rommel, very shocked. His mouth dropped open. A dragon flew in the sky. It turned its attention to the city below. It sniffed the air and thought unbelievably that here remained a trace of the blessing it had left generations ago. The dragon spun in the air and plummeted in flight. It transformed into a bird. A human foot touched the ground. A man held a fan, saying it was an excellent vessel. He stood in the forest not far from the castle. Fanning himself, he said it was time to meet the people he had blessed. The brother and sister looked ahead resolutely. A boy stood by a bookshelf holding Duke diary. A few days before he decided to become a duke, he opened the handwritten book. The man towered over the king lying in bed. Several years ago, with the help of a feudal lord, his father's brother, Uncle Zarin, had taken the throne from his weakened old father. He imagined a man in a crown and departing travelers, thinking that his father had died soon after, so he and Cheryl had fled the persecution of the authorities. The reason they had survived was because of the single condition his father had set for his brother to protect them. Imagining the coat of arms, he remembered that the children would never lay claim to the throne for the rest of their lives. And for that reason, he must allow Aaron to become Duke of the land of Bran on the edge of the empire. The monsters rushed forward. Bran was a useless land with a decrepit fortress. Naturally, nothing grew on it, and it was constantly attacked by monsters. Babies lay in cradles. Thanks to the dragon's blessing, he and Cheryl wielded the powers of a grandmaster. The guys stood on the wall. They had the power to restore life in this land. However, the Duke looked ahead, thinking that he had decided to hide his abilities for the rest of his life. Aaron held the diary, thinking it was to keep the promise he made to his father. He slammed the book shut and wondered if any promise was more valuable than the lives of his subjects. Currently, in the fortress of Bran, the boy winced in pain. The swelling on his wrist was surrounded by light. He moved his hand. Then, surprised, he exclaimed that it didn't hurt. A fair-haired girl pointed and asked him to play carefully, lest his parents worry. It was Cecilia, the saint of the Vivian Order. Folding his hands in front of him, the boy agreed. Patting his head, the saint praised him. She turned, hearing the order for everyone to appear in the square. The Duke would give a speech. Aaron stood on a stone in front of the crowd. A man crossed his arms and asked what he wanted from them. Another asked. Who knows? He might say some more nonsense, maybe even introduce taxes. A mustachioed man in a hood asked if they had heard how the Duke had changed recently. Some of the people were beaten. Aaron said he'd heard about it. He'd found all the knights who had taken money from the people and punished them. Aaron crossed his arms, thinking he wasn't surprised by the crowd's reaction. They knew nothing yet because the Duke hadn't fulfilled his duties at all. He waved his hand. Standing on the D's, the boy declared that intelligence had reported that the orcs' numbers had increased sharply, and they were trying to take their lands. If they surrounded the castle, the people would no longer be able to obtain food. They couldn't sit idly by and wait for death. A man standing in the crowd said the orcs had been doing this for years. Another asked if he just heard about it, and a third said he thought it was something serious. Touching his chest, Aaron exclaimed, Are they really going to remain victims of these green skins? Or are they going to come with him to fight for their lives? The crowd stared at him in surprise, wondering where he'd gotten this from. The boy shouted that he was Duke Aaron, their lord and master of the Bran lands, issuing a new decree. A cry echoed through the small settlement, declaring that they would no longer sit in a stubborn defense against the orcs. They were now invaders. The men exchanged surprised glances. Imagining the monster by the sacks, Aaron exclaimed, How much longer will they endure the orcs' oppression? How much longer will they watch them live richer than them? The crowd was outraged. Aaron smirked. Raising his fist, he affirmed, saying they were going to overthrow the orcs, and everyone would become rich. The people's fists rose to greedy chances. A man in a white cloak stood among the others. Looking at the young man in the crowd, he wondered if he had received his blessing. A smile appeared on the dragon's lips, and he said he didn't want to stay long, but he had potential. A scroll appeared in his hand. Words could be heard from the room with the books, saying he had ordered everything to be bought yesterday. Aaron and the bearded old man were arguing angrily. Their conversation could be heard. Why hadn't he even bought 100 suits of armor? The young man replied. What if the expedition fails? He then heard the old man say. What if he takes responsibility then? The guys glared at each other. There was a knock on the black door. The disputants turned angrily, shouting at each other to enter and leave. As the door opened, Rommel appeared and announced that a man from Duke Raynon's recommendation had come to see him. The guys stared at him in surprise. The man, scroll in hand, bowed in greeting and said his name was Kindness and that he had come on Duke Raynon's recommendation. Taking the scroll, Aaron asked again on his personal recommendation and mentally recalled Kindness, thinking he had introduced himself as a strategist, but had left them a year later. His appearance was hard to forget. The boy unfolded the paper. He carefully read that 3 years had passed since he settled in the lands of Bran. On the parchment were black lines stating that there wasn't a day when he wasn't painfully reminded of his constant struggle to survive in this hell. This time he sent him a promising strategist, and some gold for the treasury. He hoped Kindness would serve him well these 3 years and that they would meet again someday. Holding the scroll, Aaron mused that Duke Rhainon had been loyal to the late emperor. Then his eyes widened with realization. Returning to the man, he asked for a little gold. The old man's eyes lit up with greed. Kindness laughed, saying he had sent 50,000 gold. The old advisor was saddened, saying it was understandable. The Duke was also going through hard times. Looking at him, Aaron ordered him not to complain. The money could buy enough equipment, and use the rest to cleanse the city. The man, surprised, asked again, "Cleanse the city?" Raising a finger, Aaron argued that investing for the future meant keeping gold in the treasury was imperceptible. It was better to invest it. If they didn't clean up the cities, frequent outbreaks of disease would occur, and then they would lose their most important resource, people. The fewer people they had, the more difficult it would be to distribute their forces, ultimately leading to the collapse of the castle. The dragon covered his face with a fan, thinking that his logic wasn't entirely sound. But more importantly, his train of thought was on the right track. Few people thought so far ahead, even fewer remembered hygiene. Perhaps he would be suitable as the caretaker of his nest. As he left the room, the old man grumpily told them to do whatever they wanted, and he resigned. The doors slammed. Aaron looked at Kindness and thought this was a strategist from Duke Rhainon on himself. He was just about to memorize strategy textbooks when he appeared just in time. Touching his chin, Aaron said that although the Duke had recommended him, he should understand that he couldn't immediately appoint him as chief strategist, as that could cause many of his subjects to rebel. The man nodded, confirming his point. Looking at him, Aaron continued that he would therefore be glad if he could demonstrate his skills in the upcoming campaign against the orcs. Shielding his face with a fan, Kindness said he would assist him in the upcoming campaign and thought how a pathetic man could doubt him. That was interesting. Aaron smiled, saying he relied on him and thought that if all went well, he would work with this man for the next 3 years. Kindness fanned himself, thinking that the better he got to know this man, the more fascinating he would become. And he promised out loud that he wouldn't let him down. Bowing his head, the boy remembered that his goal after the war with the orcs was to develop the dungeons. The guy was surprised. Aaron stood before a group of warriors a week later. Putting his hand on his hip, he said he hoped everyone had memorized their strategy by now. Did anyone need to explain it all over again? The soldiers remained silent. Looking at them, the boy resolutely exclaimed that they were leaving then. Pointing his sword forward, he shouted that today they would destroy the orc lair and become rich. Spears rose. The gates opened. Aaron rode ahead of the others on horseback. The guys stood at a cliff in the Black Forest. Aaron looked down, thinking that Kurok was the chieftain of an orc tribe who had captured a citadel and made a nest there. He imagined monsters attacking people and thought that because of them, their food supply lines had been destroyed. And a few years later, it was precisely because of them that a mass famine began. The boy clenched his fist, thinking that the problem needed to be nipped in the bud, and that's what he would do. Rommel, standing behind him, hit himself in the chest and said that they had found the cobalt archers. Without turning around, the boy asked how many. Looking at him, the knight replied, 5 groups, each with 5 or 6 monsters. Aaron turned and called Cheryl. His sister peeked out of the tent. Aaron drew a circle in the air with his finger. With a disgruntled sigh, the girl said she was already on her way. The girl, holding a staff, walked through the forest. A fireball soared upward. A face was visible on the fireball of the 3rd circle. Rays of light emanated from the staff. Cheryl said that this was the 3rd circle spell which hits like the 5th. Flames flew forward. The monster with the club stood in front of the others. The kobolds looked up. A fireball surrounded them. The monsters engulfed in flames screamed. The guys watched the smoke rise. Touching his head sadly, Eren asked what the third circle was that hit like the fifth. He had asked them not to use magic stronger than the third circle so as not to attract the Emperor's attention. The offended sister stuck her tongue out at him. Eren covered his face with his hand, thinking that if he'd known she'd use anything other than the piercing wind, he wouldn't have taken her today. Ines waved his fan and said he'd find out sooner or later, especially since the soldiers didn't spread rumors. There shouldn't be any problems. Closing his eyes, the Duke agreed and asked, "Have they found the right place?" The man confirmed with a confident expression. The day before the campaign began, Kynes fanned himself and said the best outcome of the war against the monsters was to destroy them before the real war began. They had little choice, and now the best strategy was to draw the enemy to a convenient location and destroy them there. The young man sitting at the table asked again, and was told this was necessary to avoid heavy losses. He introduced armored warriors, saying that the orc tribe numbered about 2,000, and even if they won, the losses would be incomparable. They only had 500 warriors. The sister and the knight nodded. Looking at them, Kynes continued that besides everything else, since they were attacking, every move needed to be carefully considered. He pictured the orcs catching up to the knight, and advised luring them out first with cavalry. He turned with a smile to Eren who asked, "Should they use 100 cavalrymen as bait?" Pictured goblins stricken with arrows. The dragon explained that this would give them speed. They would set an ambush as soon as the orcs approached the forest. Archers and marksmen should destroy at least half the enemy force. He pictured knights with shields surrounding the monsters and continued. Then they would push them into open ground and surround them with heavily armed knights until they surrendered. Closing one eye, the boy said that was excellent. Then he looked ahead and said that they would proceed according to Kynes' plan. The monsters lay in the burning forest. The goblins approached the body. Then they ran off to the side. A rider standing by the cliff heard what appeared to be their movement. Behind them was Kynes, who said that these seemed to be unusual orcs. Since they had scouts, they would quickly prepare for battle as soon as they sensed trouble. Smiling, the man asked, "If that was the case, why not make the advanced orcs their slaves?" Eren turned to him. Shielding his face with a fan, the man said he thought such a workforce would help his goal of developing the dungeons. Eren was struck by the idea. Looking at the advisor, he said the idea was good. But would monsters really help a human? He'd heard that monsters only listened to dragons' orders. The dragon in the human's body laughed, saying no. Orcs were a species that obeyed only superior force, so being a dragon wasn't necessary. Turning away, the boy said he'd deal with it later. He didn't want his greed to lead to more casualties. The advisor nodded. Standing in front of the forest, the boy asked, "Is it time to begin?" Turning to Cheryl, he ordered 200 soldiers to take positions in the forest, while Rama was to form an iron ring and ambush. Turning the other way, he asked Kynes to remain at the top of the hill. The man with the fan nodded in agreement. Eren extended his sword. Then he pointed them forward with a war cry. The orc leader sat on his throne, eating meat. A monster approached him and announced that the humans were attacking. The leader spat out a piece. Kurak, radiating a sinister aura, asked where it was coming from. An orc with sharp fangs replied. From the black forest, a shadow fell across the leader's face, who said that the insects hiding behind the stone walls had finally emerged, already dead. Raising his hand with a club, the monster roared that the meat was coming to them, that they would kill all the humans and capture their castle. The crowd of warriors at the castle roared in response. The leader's eyes blazed and he ordered the release of the Minotaur. One of the orcs tugged at the chain. A huge bull with an axe was in the cage. He raised his ringed nose and roared. Kurak swung his club and called for killing and plunder. His subordinates raised their weapons in response. The sinister army of monsters advanced. The sun was visible from behind the hills. A bird flew across the sky. The orcs ran quickly. The bird watched them from above. The monsters reflected in its eye. Between the man's palms was a magic ball. Standing at the edge of the cliff, Kynes mentally told the man that the time had come. The army was moving forward. Drawing his sword, Eren ordered them to prepare for clash. He raised his weapon. Swinging it, he shouted forward. The horse galloped quickly. An orc ran towards them. The two armies were almost at each other. The knights heard the order to attack. The orcs opened their mouths and roared. Sparks of battle rose up. Eren and 100 cavalry against Kurak and 2,000 orcs. Eren swung his sword. Drops of blood appeared. The armies clashed. Looking at the orc, the boy thought that it wasn't enough. He needed to press them further, and then he noticed something ahead. An axe was descending. It flew at Eren's head. The huge minotaur raised its jaws and screamed. Aaron and his soldiers covered their ears. Turning, the boy shouted to not be afraid and to keep moving. The knights exchanged glances. Aaron charged forward, shouting. A green monster stood before him. Aaron raised his sword. He remembered his advisor's words about manpower helping the dungeons develop. He swung his sword sharply downwards. The blow landed flat. Looking at the approaching monsters, he thought they had driven them into the black forest. Turning, the Duke ordered a retreat as there were too many enemies. The orcs looked at him in surprise. The human army turned, growling and shouting that the humans were running away. They must follow. Together with the Minotaur, they gave chase. The humans led the orcs out of the forest. A man galloping behind them told the lord that they were being pursued. Turning to the red-haired woman, he shouted that he would deal with them and tell them to retreat to the hill. He galloped back, thinking he had no intention of losing them. He looked determined. The Minotaur raised its arm to attack, and Aaron continued his thought, not a single one of his own. The knight turned to face the monster's fists, and Aaron continued. A soldier. He struck the bull with his sword. The monster was thrown back, and its carcass fell to the ground. The knight, watching this, let out a delighted sound. Putting his foot on the monster's body, Aaron thought she told him to go up the hill. But at least he wouldn't have to drag it himself. He asked Arthur to tie up this monster and throw it further into the bushes. The man with the mustache looked surprised, asking, Will he kill him? Looking at him, the boy replied, No, he'll need him later. Alarmed, the man agreed. The knight pointed and said that the orcs were advancing. The monsters were approaching and one of them said, Here are the humans, while the other suggested killing them all. Light fell on their faces. They looked up, looking at the fireballs. A powerful explosion sounded. Turning around, Aaron wondered what Cheryl was doing. Why kill all the orcs? He ordered a retreat. Kurok watched him. Frowning, he ordered them to catch up. They would avenge all their brothers. The knights galloped toward the sunset. The orc ran after them. Suddenly, something hit him in the temple. He tumbled backwards. A row of shields formed in front of the orcs. Human knights held them. The green monsters growled at this. The shields formed a wall. Aaron walked proudly past them. Looking down, he said that Kurok and all his kin were surrounded. He was giving everyone a chance to survive. A duel between the two leaders would take place, and the losing race would become slaves. Frowning, the green monster said that the orc didn't trust the human and thought that if he wanted, all his orcs would be killed. Humans couldn't be trusted. Looking down, the boy promised to swear on his warrior's honor, and he would do the same. Looking at him, the orc chieftain said that a human had no honor. Aaron frowned and ordered them to lock shields. The knights did so. Raising his club, Kurok agreed and asked him to keep his promise. The opponents stood facing each other. The monster took off abruptly. Swinging his club, he wished for death. The club struck the ground. Aaron stood unharmed in the dispersing dust. Steam billowed from the orc's mouth. Aaron dodged the club, watching his opponent. He thought this was what the dragon's blessing felt like. He hadn't yet fully mastered his body, but it seemed to react to the orc's attacks. Looking at him darkly, the monster called him a coward. Aaron grew angry. The blade sank into the ground. Angrily cracking his knuckles, Aaron said he would teach him manners. A frightened Rommel screamed, asking why he threw down his sword. Flexing his fists, the Duke asked him not to worry. He'd teach him a good lesson. Kurok tossed aside his club, saying that a man has honor, and then he too would throw down his weapon. He would break a man with his own hands. Rommel watched him approach the Lord, thinking that no matter how strong a man without a weapon was, anyone would lose to an orc. His paw reached for his fist. The man thought that orcs grew in battle their entire lives. They were stronger than most humans. Even their claws had become sharper, especially since the Duke wasn't even wearing gloves. The monster flew forward rapidly. Aaron watched the paw approach, his gaze intent. He watched the green hand move and wondered why it moved so slowly. He was concentrating slightly. Turning, the boy wondered what kind of blow he'd strike. The orc clenched his fist and swung, attacking the boy, thinking he'd test him. Aaron dodged the attack. A fist lightly grazed his cheek. The Duke slid back, touching the scratches. He thought he knew it would happen. It barely hurt. One of the warriors behind the shield asked if the Lord was really being defeated and what would happen to them if he really lost. Kurok beat his chest, shouting that he would make all the humans slaves. He stood in front of the boy and growled. Aaron held up a finger and ordered him to be quiet. The orc tensed, jumping up. Aaron extended his hand, saying that today was their time. He slapped the orc across the face with his palm. He fell to the ground. The monster shook his head. Jumping to his feet, Kurok asked if the human was using magic, and where was his honor. He was surprised when Aaron approached, saying that they would become slaves. The boy attacked again, finishing with their slaves. The orc leader flew back. He flew towards the knights, who ordered their shields to be raised. The barriers became a wall. The orc bounced off the shields and flew toward Eren. Eren caught the orc's head in his hands, smashing it between his palms like a sword. The orc's eyes closed, and he begged for mercy. Eren slammed him hard into the ground. The battered chieftain lay in the rising dust. The handprint remained on the ground near his head. The orc's enslavement was complete. Eren held the bound orc's rope. He stood on the wall with him, coughing into his fist. He addressed the orcs, saying that he did not intend to kill them yet, but from now on, they would become slaves to humans. The monsters looked stunned. Looking down, the boy continued that they would now work on Bran's lands. In exchange, he would grant them the right to hunt in the nearby forests. If their tasks were completed, they would share their food with him. However, if even one orc tried to rebel, he would kill them all and personally break the neck of anyone standing there. The orcs also looked at him silently. A vein bulged on the boy's face. He grabbed Kurok by the hair and shouted that if they remained silent, he would do to them the same as he had done to him. The monsters lined up in a chorus, agreed that everything was understood. Eren smiled, saying that in exchange for his wasted time and punishment for their misdeeds, they would take food from their reserves for themselves. The warriors rode into the fortress. The people rejoiced, praising the Duke. The soldiers returned victorious. They had defeated the orcs. Eren waved his hand. Looking at the knight, he asked him to bring the orcs. The prisoners emerged from the portal. Eren raised his sword using great swordsmanship and piercing wind. Waves of energy scattered everywhere. The bound orc trembled, thinking of this power. Turning to the captives, Eren declared that the orcs would serve the dragon's great power. They pressed their foreheads to the ground and heard the command to raise their heads. Pointing his sword, Eren told them to remember what he had single-handedly done to this city and to remember their place in this world. The next day, Kurok knelt, declaring that his brothers swore not to reveal his power. If they tried to take revenge, he would stop them. Looking down, the red-haired one asked them to remember that if any single orc did anything, he would exterminate their entire species. Kainos approached Eren saying that he had truly subjugated the orc. That was commendable. Spreading his arms, the boy said that they seemed to have mistaken him for a dragon. That made the task easier. The man laughed, hiding his face behind his fan, and asked again. Looking ahead, he asked. He knows dragons never forgive those who pretend to be one of them, right? The boy waved his hand and asked them not to misunderstand. He hadn't even mentioned the dragon. It seemed they made that up themselves. He'd simply decided not to disturb their flights of fancy. The dragon laughed, saying they were simply afraid of its power. Eren imagined the Duke from his past life and thought that this power was comparable to that of a dragon. Kainos was surprised by this reaction. Eren's daily glance indicated that he could tell the others about the orcs. In about an hour, he would call another meeting. The man nodded, putting his hand on his hip. Eren thought that Duke Eren with such power could protect his lands and subjects, and even if he couldn't, he owed it to himself to at least try. Was his promise to the former king really that important? Snapping his fingers until he shuddered. Eren thought he still had no intention of keeping those promises. His primary duty was to protect his subjects just as nobles did. He imagined the man in the crown, thinking he would definitely prepare for the battle that would decide everything. Eren sat at the table at the duchy's post-war meeting, explaining that they had successfully completed the military campaign against the orcs without a single loss. All thanks to the strategist Kainos. Cheryl took offense, pursing her lips. The man bowed, saying he was pleased to hear praise. Without him, none of this would have happened. Slamming her palms on the table, the girl screamed, asking why no one had praised her. Had they all forgotten how bravely she had blown up the orcs with all that magic? Turning to her, the boy asked who had asked her to blow everyone up. She had killed so many orcs whom they would have enslaved and worked to death. Cheryl stuck her tongue out at her brother. He stared sternly ahead, explaining that the land available to them had now increased fivefold, and he believed it was time to discuss the efficient use of this land. He proposed developing dungeons. His subordinates stared at him in surprise, asking what kind of development this was. The duchy administrator, a spy from the poor aristocracy, Max, gasped in surprise, asking if he really intended to use the dungeon to imprison tourists. Eren turned to the man with a fan and asked, "He's already made a plan, right?" He smiled, saying he'd been a bit busy, but had still managed to do it. He placed a large scroll on the table, opened it with a wave of his hand, and declared it to be the master plan for the dungeon opening and development project. The plan took up the entire large table. His subordinates looked at it with varying emotions. Eren clapped his hands, saying he'd done a good job. He placed his hand on Kainos' shoulder, and remarked that the plan was missing two important details. The dragon's mouth dropped open in surprise, asking what he missed. Pointing a finger, Eren declared that they would treacherously frame adventurers, forcing them on the brink of death to sign a contract that would make them his slaves. Max gaped in shock, saying, "Master, make people slaves. He's an aristocrat, his reputation." Waving his hand, Eren replied that he didn't care about reputation. The most important thing was not to die of hunger here. Even aristocrats were human just like all his subjects. Without food, he would die too. He looked at Kindness, who laughed loudly. The man covered his face with his fan and said that he was excellent at transcending simple logic. It was shameful and disgraceful that he, his strategist, had misunderstood their intentions. He would definitely add the adventurous treachery to the plan. Clutching his head in dismay, Max thought this was madness. At this rate, the duchy would surely perish. The next day, Eren and the others walked down the street. Turning to the old man, he asked if he was really in charge of city sanitation. The bald man, looking at him, said yes. He was 100% certain they wouldn't starve to death under his command, so he'd happily use the entire winter budget for it. Grimacing with displeasure, Eren replied that there was food, especially since they had savings. The old man shrugged and said, "What savings? Didn't he think equipment for the war with the orcs just fell out of the sky?" Glancing sideways at the residents, he said he thought this city cleanup would be enough, and that there was no need to waste any more money on it. A vein bulged in Eren's angry face. Pointing his finger, he angrily yelled at him, asking how many times he had to tell him that cleaning wasn't just for show to keep people from getting sick. The city needed to be cleaned constantly, and they should pay the workers with food obtained after the war with the orcs. The financier exhaled, saying that they would all soon come to an end. Looking around the street, Eren thought that at this rate, they would indeed run out of food and have no sanitation. But how could they solve this? One of the men pointed and told Captain Rommel that it was a nun illegally performing healing again. Turning, the boy asked who the nun was. A glow was visible behind the crowd. Looking there, Rommel said that it must be a nun from the Vivian Order healing the people again. Eren imagined the cloaked men and thought that as he remembered, this religious order would soon disappear under the onslaught of another. Then his eyes widened and he asked, "Healing the people?" A guard with a spear stood behind, shouting that this was unacceptable. Who authorized the illegal use of religious magic? The assembled people fell silent. Then they began to disperse. The hooded girl apologized, saying she didn't know. The guard watched them walk away. A man held a baby and begged the priestess to heal his son. He was dying. The old man shouted that if they were driving them out, they should at least build a hospital. These girls were helping them somehow, so why were they driving them out? The man grabbed the warrior by the robes and shouted, asking if he was ready to answer for his son's death. The nun threw up her hands, trying to stop them, saying they would return. The people froze, hearing a satisfied cry. They turned away. Eren held out his palm, indicating that the nun could continue. The girls gathered nearby, whispering. Coming closer, the young man thanked them for helping his subjects. He had no reason to drive them out. He personally allowed them to help people. The villagers raised their hands in jubilation. An embarrassed Cecilia looked at him with gratitude. Eren blushed and turned away. Turning back, he said that the nuns could continue their treatment and that she should come with him. The girl smiled slightly. Walking ahead, Eren wondered what he cared about religion. Free treatment was important. He'd make them work until they died of exhaustion. In the duchy's meeting room, a nun threw herself on his lap. Pushing her aside, Eren wondered if she knew that holy virgins forfeit God's blessing when they touch men. Cecilia looked at him admiringly, asking if he really wanted to build a temple. Taking a sip from his cup, the man replied, "Why not?" Behind the delighted girls stood an enraged old man. Frowning, he shouted, "Why not? They simply didn't have the money. If they built the temple, they'd have nothing in the treasure." Looking at him calmly, the man replied that he knew, but didn't they still have hidden savings? The man furiously shouted that the previous emperor had left him this money for an emergency. Eren declared that the emergency had arrived. The bald man bowed and grimly said he understood. Cecilia, tears in her eyes, smiled and thanked him. Holding out his palm, Eren stopped her and said he had conditions for their order in exchange for such generosity. Interlacing her fingers, the girl carefully asked, "Conditions?" Holding out his palm, Eren confirmed. Eren raised one finger and explained that he was talking about the production of holy water. He'd heard that holy water could be directly created in the temple. Was she willing to promise her assistance in developing their lands and producing holy water? Blushing slightly, the girl happily promised. Fronting slightly, Eren asked. Even if it meant producing as much holy water as he wanted, Cecilia, smiling, closed her eyes and confirmed. A few weeks later, a man ran up the stairs. Aaron turned and saw Kindness. The man with the fan told the master that the orcs had discovered a hidden dungeon located near their fortress. Looking at him, the boy asked what kind of dungeon it was. Introducing the orc chieftain, he said that according to Kurak, this was a long abandoned place. Looking at him, Aaron asked if this was mentioned anywhere in the ancient writings. Wasn't there even a master there? The guy waved his hand and replied that they'd found absolutely nothing. Apparently, the dungeon was now a den of all sorts of creatures. Standing opposite, he asked if they would develop something like this. He found it hard to imagine how they could attract tourists there. Walking thoughtfully beside him, Aaron mused that it was an abandoned dungeon. No one would believe that a high-ranking dungeon had just appeared. His eyes widened, recalling the saint. His lips stretched into a sly smile, and he said he'd had a great idea. He'd found a way to lure adventurers there. Turning abruptly, he pointed and shouted that they were spreading rumors about an elixir of eternal life that could be found there. Kindness looked at him in bewilderment, saying that they had nothing of the sort. Aaron nodded and said that indeed there was. A container of water stood in front of the statue. Kindness watched the girl heal a man. He looked closely, wondering what that light was. The nun was surrounded by a radiance, and he wondered if it was divine power literally bursting from her body. Where did such a being come from? Cecilia turned, seeing the guys. She ran toward the master in admiration. The face of the holy maiden appeared behind her. Kindness closed his eyes from her blinding radiance. Wincing, he wondered if people couldn't sense this divine power. Aaron stepped back, causing the girl to fall, but she rose with a sweet smile. Aaron, embarrassed, looked away and asked how things were going, if everything was fine, and mentally told himself not to forget that Cecilia was his cheap holy water maker. The girl closed her eyes with a smile, and said that he saw they were almost finished. Standing opposite, the boy said he came for holy water. Could she create it yet? Looking at him admiringly, the girl replied, "Of course." She sat by the statue, addressing the goddess Vivian, saying that her devoted servant had come with a plea, asking her to grant them a portion of her energy and create a miracle. The container of water began to glow blindingly. The guys stared at it in surprise. Kindness thought it couldn't be. This wasn't human power. She must be a direct descendant of the goddess. Hadn't she awakened yet? Holding a ladle of water, Aaron told the old man to try it. He was the oldest and sickest there, and the effect would be most noticeable on him. The man took the container, saying that as if simple water could cure it, he could understand if it was real medicine. He took a sip. His eyes widened. When he finished, he exhaled. He stretched, then somersaulted through the air, looking admiringly at his hands. He said he felt 5 years younger and was asked, "Is it better than real medicine?" Aaron smiled at the nun. Then he became indignant when she clung to his hand. The confused young man considered simply pouring some holy water into the dungeon and spreading the rumor that the springs of eternal life were there. But the effectiveness of this water was astonishing. In that case, he should keep Cecilia, his cheap holy water maker, as close as possible. He waved his hand, beckoning Kindness. He came closer, putting his hand to his face. Aaron whispered how difficult it would be to spread such a rumor about the elixir. Covering his mouth with a fan, the man replied that he assured him such powerful holy water was nowhere else. Of course, it wouldn't grant eternal life, but even that would be enough for adventurers. Aaron smiled, saying that since everything was ready, it was time to head to the dungeon. Cecilia looked at him admiringly and said she'd like to introduce him to someone. Looking at him, Aaron asked who. Holding her palms together, she replied, "The captain of the Holy Knights of their order." Aaron looked at her in surprise and asked, "Does the Vivian order have holy knights?" He presented the shining golden shield of the Holy Knights. Its body was armored. Unlike other warriors, they specialize in defense. The knights stood by a blinding flash. They dedicate their body to the divine to withstand and repel any attack. A group of knights stood before the castle. He thought that united, their defense would be as strong as the fortress. Looking down sadly, Cecilia said that they only had one captain of the Holy Knights left. Leaning closer, Aaron whispered, "Will this captain be coming to them?" He turned around when he was called. A red-haired boy, a blonde in knightly armor, approached and told him not to crowd their saint. He wasn't worthy of even standing near her. Aaron asked, displeased. The girl closed her eyes, saying she came because the holy maiden had decided to build a temple here, a dead land with weak people and a useless duke. Smirking, she said it was simply pathetic. Looking sternly, Cecilia told Lady Bianca that she couldn't speak to their lord like that. Aaron rubbed his chin and asked again about weak people. Bianca, standing opposite, confirmed and said she was willing to obey only the strongest. Looking at her indifferently, the boy asked how many she had obeyed in her life. Resolutely beating her chest, the knight declared that so far no one, because no one could match her strength. Aaron smiled and asked if she wanted to make a bet. The blonde was surprised. Aaron held up 3 fingers and said the loser would receive 3 strong blows from the winner, after which they would see if she would submit to him. The girl frowned, calling him a weakling. Aaron grinned confidently. The guys stood facing each other. Arthur shook his head, asking why they should start a battle with an obvious winner. It was painful to watch. A man standing nearby said that the master had defeated the orc with the help of stunning sleep magic. He had intended to fight without a sword. The one standing behind him asked if one of them would get seriously hurt. Looking ahead with concern, Arthur asked what they should do. All they could do was pray. Aaron picked up a branch from the ground. Bianca frowned, asking how dare he fight her with a branch. The guy looked at the branch and told her not to listen to the evil ant. She was very good. The blonde frowned. Holding her shield in front of her, she called upon the goddess Vivin to grant her the power to crush her enemies. Her hair fluttered. Aaron yawned, asking why he was taking so long to prepare for the attack. Afraid of the stick. Rushing forward, the girl ordered him to be quiet. She quickly rushed toward her opponent. A blue glow appeared around the branch. The boy swung it sharply. The attack struck the shield. The girl fell to one knee. Looking down at her, Aaron asked, "Was one blow with the branch really enough?" He slammed the shield again. It cracked. The girl was frightened when it shattered. She fell to her knees. Aaron's eyes blazed as he said that they both remembered the conditions. The loser must endure 3 strong blows. Let them expose themselves. He swung the branch, saying that this was the first blow. The blow landed on the back of the girl's head. The knights closed their eyes in dismay. Swinging his sword, the boy said, "A second blow." Bianca trembled. The boy swung for a 3rd blow. The girl fell to the ground. Standing over her, Aaron said the punishment was over and that she should never dare insult him on his soil again. Barely moving, the knight rose. The guys looked at her in surprise. With a coquettish smile, Bianca said that no one had ever humiliated her so cruelly and asked to make her theirs. Celia covered her mouth with her hand, cutting her off. The boy recoiled in surprise, covering the elder's mouth with her hand. Cecilia said that the captain of the Order of the Holy Knights must have gotten a little carried away reading her favorite novels, and that he shouldn't misunderstand. Confused, Aaron asked what novels she was reading. Glancing sideways at Ramo, he ordered the warriors to be assembled to clear the dungeon. Later, he stood before the lined-up warriors. Kaina stood behind him and heard that having removed the soldiers needed to defend their borders, they had only 100 warriors left, far too few. Pointing at him, the man explained that only 5,000 people lived in Brandland. By law, they mobilized every 10th man. So, a large army would require a huge population, which they didn't have. Even if they suddenly gained new residents, they wouldn't have the resources to feed them. Aaron touched his chin thoughtfully, explaining that to attract residents, they first needed to improve their living conditions. The dragon standing nearby said he would try to find a way to improve their dire situation. The red-haired man glanced at him and agreed. He remembered the people on the street, thinking that if he wasn't mistaken, a large number of refugees would appear in the territories of Count Grey and Count Amon at this very time. The dark-haired man looked at him, questioning his actions. The man's eyes widened. He waved his hand and said that as they'd heard, they were heading to the dungeon, clearing everything out and taking the treasure with them. Swords rose. The warriors galloped toward the dungeon. They stopped not far from the orcs. Kurak bowed, greeting the overlord. Dismounting, the boy asked how everything had gone. The chieftain looked away, saying something had happened. Aaron looked at him questioningly, or rather, they were walking through the 2nd floor of a dungeon in the holy grounds of Aten. An orc pointed and said that these brothers had become strange. Cheryl rubbed her shoulders and asked if everyone felt this strange cold. In front of them were orcs engulfed in a purple haze. The guys looked at them in surprise. The possessed orcs bared their teeth. They rushed forward. The chieftain's eyes widened, shouting for them to stop, otherwise the overlord would kill them all. The girl rushed forward. The orc swung his club and threw the attacker back. The monster fell among the others. A gray substance rose from its body. Watching it tensely, Kynes urged caution, saying that these were ghosts. The ghost, engulfed in a purple haze, flew forward. Kurak struck it with his club. The ghost flew towards Aaron. He extended his sword, blocking it. He stared intently at the blade. A multitude of ghosts hovered around the guys. Holding her staff, Cheryl said that these creatures would give her nightmares. A fireball appeared at the end of the staff. The ghosts hovered near the ceiling. Then, they rushed toward the girl. Aaron slashed at them with his sword. The girl summoned a stream of fire from her staff at the enemies. A fiery beam emerged from the ball's mouth. The ghost's remains fell to the floor. The girl turned her back when she heard her name being called. She turned around. Rommel was fighting a ghost and asked for help. They couldn't harm these things. Hiding behind a stone, Kindness remembered he forgot to mention that only magic could harm ghosts. Frowning at him, the man exclaimed that he could have said something earlier. Aiming her staff, Cheryl ordered him to stay put. Fire erupted from the staff. He landed right next to the knight. The tip of the sword burst into flames. Aaron held the burning weapon. Kirok's club also glowed. Then it crumbled into ash. The orb at the end of the staff remained shamefully silent. The knight swung his sword. The dungeon filled with flames. Ghosts fell to the ground. They rushed like a whirlwind toward the light, screaming loudly. The guys covered their ears. The ghost had gathered into a single enormous monster. It flew toward the entrance. The black substance seemed to smile. A burning blade flashed past it. Putting away his sword, Aaron asked, "Is that all?" Touching the books on the shelf, Kindness said that it seemed the ghosts were here for a reason. Perhaps they were guarding something. Cheryl held one of the books and offered her brother a look. He glanced at it. In her hands was a book called Legacy of the Ancients. She remembered people praying and said that during the time of the Demon Empire, there had been a temple of some group of monks here. Her eyes widened in surprise when she read about spiritual power training. Looking at her, her brother asked, "What?" The girl holding the book read that unlike mages who used external power, these monks could tap into a different kind of power, a spiritual one. Touching his chin, Aaron said he'd never heard of such a thing before and thought that even a decade ago, someone knew about it. He introduced the characters next to the vessels and explained that essentially a mage's external power is a vessel filled with mana that they receive at birth, while spiritual power is a vessel that can be expanded and modified. Handing the book to Kindness, he asked if he'd ever heard of such an art. Thoughtfully opening the book, the man said it was intriguing. If it were true, as Mistress Cheryl explained, then through spiritual training, even an ordinary person could use magic. The boy clapped his hand loudly and exclaimed, "Does that mean their soldiers can master magic too?" The man frowned, saying that even if that were true, he didn't think it was worth trying yet. Looking at him, the red-haired man asked why. The dungeon looked gloomy, and he suggested looking around. The entire dungeon was covered in blood with signs of endless fighting everywhere. Looking away, the man said that perhaps the training of this power was so inhumane, or the power itself so dangerous, that they ended up simply killing each other. Aaron looked at the book and said he'd hide it for now. On the third level of the dungeon, the boy was fighting, agreeing to nothing. The guys looked at a chest full of gold. Turning, Aaron said that since they were finished, Kirok could take half of the treasure. They would leave the rest here. Closing his eyes, Kindness asked the master if he would allow him to collect half the gold. Looking at him, the boy asked what for. The guy covered his face with a fan and said that since the dungeon was fairly simple, it would be difficult to put the adventurers in a critical situation. Touching his chin, Aaron said he thought that was true. Kindness spread his hands, saying that with this gold he could add a few additions to the dungeon. Looking up at him, the boy asked again. The orcs were repairing the dungeon. As a result, a labyrinth appeared within it. Kindness stood in one of the passages. With a smile, he said that the foundation of the labyrinth was complete. A bright glow appeared around the man, and he declared that he was an ancient dragon, commanding all the dead. He pointed his fan forward and commanded them to rise. A whirlwind flew through the labyrinth's passages. Bones rose into the air. Skeletons were formed from them. Ghosts began to appear in the passages. They rose upward. Standing in the labyrinth, the man said he thought a couple of torches should be added. Water filled a small spring. Kindness scooped some into a flask and spoke something in an unknown language. The water in the flask glowed. He poured it into the spring and touched it with his little finger. Licking his finger, the man said it tasted good, was suitable for this place, and would prolong life for about a year. The dragon smiled, saying that all that remained was to find greedy customers. The dungeon was a gloomy labyrinth. People crowded at the castle gates. Turning away, the guard ordered them to be lowered. The gates opened. The man touched his hat and said that heavy rain would come and when would this winter finally end. Walking forward, he noted that all the guards here were wearing new armor. Walking behind, the hairy girl asked if they had found something in that new dungeon, an artifact, for example. Otherwise, she couldn't imagine why they were wasting so much money. Pointing, the man asked if she thought there were unnecessary expenses there, too. The windows in the building were lit up. The man smiled slightly and said that the others were still under construction, but that was true, just like the new one. Closing her eyes, the girl nodded and said that meant they were happily awaiting their kind, or more precisely, they were waiting for gold, which they would spend on alcohol and food. Smiling slightly, the man in the hat said that if that was the entrance fee, he would spend enough there. The bell and the door rang. The man standing at the counter greeted Gerald. He waved his hat and asked how many people he had robbed to build such a tavern. The second floor was also an inn. After all, the owner smiled, saying that he hadn't robbed anyone, that it had all been done on credit. In any case, had they heard about the new dungeon? A crowd of people would be arriving here soon, so they should hurry while they had time. Gerald laughed and said he hadn't expected to hear such a rush from him. He looked around. Handing the man a coin, the man asked what he knew about the dungeon. Crossing his arms, he explained that he'd heard rumors of a source of eternal life. Gerald brought his ear closer. He was surprised to hear a whisper that they were the first adventurers going there. Tossing his friend a coin, the man said he never lets anyone down. He should bring something to eat, and they'll enrich this tavern. The next morning, Aaron sat engulfed in blue flames. Before him was an open book on spiritual power. He closed his eyes and thought that he couldn't yet harness the dragon's blessing to its full potential. Linus had rightly observed that these teachings could be dangerous, but he needed his own power, his own. He tensed. A blue haze spread around him. The girl approached and called for the master. He opened his eyes. Cecilia looked at him in surprise. Coming to, Aaron jumped back and asked what was wrong. Did he need something? The girl was holding a plate of sandwiches and said she came to somehow express all her feelings. The embarrassed boy held the plate. He looked away, hearing something. A knight was running toward them and the girl said she would go. She ran to the gate. Aaron sighed lovingly. The knight hit himself in the chest with his fist and said the adventurers had arrived. Aaron was delighted and asked how many slaves there were. The next day, horsemen galloped toward the dungeon. A wooden sign read in spring. A group of people approached the gate. The red-haired girl looked at the sign and asked what the conditions were. The entrance fee was 10 gold. After paying, the knight handed her a scroll and told her that this was the payment slip and that she shouldn't lose it as it was her pass to the dungeon. The knights blocked Gerald's passage, saying they couldn't enter without proof of payment. Raising his eyebrows, the man said what they just bought. The knight opened his mouth, saying 10 gold pieces per person. The people in line became agitated, saying it was robbery. That money could feed a family for 3 months. It was some kind of scam. The guard held a spear, declaring that he was now declaring the words of the owner of the brand lands, Duke Aaron, and quoted that they could always earn 10 gold, but the elixir of eternal life could run out at any moment. Let them decide for themselves what was more valuable. The adventurer reached into his pocket and placed a bag in the man's palm. Those interested went to the man, who said that the dungeon was inhabited by numerous undead. If they wanted to defeat them, they only needed holy water, 1 gold piece. Gerald showed him a bottle and said he had some. Looking away, the cunning man said it was water from another church. They, poor things, didn't know that the holy water of the Vivian Church was far more powerful. The man grimly adjusted his hat. He paid a few coins to the man who thanked him. Folding his hands, the merchant asked if he would like more magical equipment. Gerald, closing his eyes, angrily asked to see. A man stood by a sign that said, "Emergency rescue request costs 100 gold per person," and asked what the scam was this time. The man handed him a gray stone. Touching his chest, he honestly said there was no scam. It was a special artifact designed for adventurers. For just 100 gold, he could save his life. What a miracle. Looking at it intently, Gerald asked, "What if they didn't make the request?" Crossing his arms, the man replied that they wouldn't charge them then. The adventurer glanced sideways at the entrance, wondering if they found the source of eternal life there. They would earn tens of times more than they had spent here. The guys entered the dungeon. A row of magic orbs stood on the table. Aaron and Kindness greedily gazed into one of them. Kirok turned when he was called. Aaron placed a hand on his shoulder and said that holy water would make the battle with the ghosts easier in an hour, and that he should come down and heat things up. On the second floor of the dungeon, a girl was sending arrows of ice forward. She poured out water, freezing the ghosts. Black shadows flew down the corridor. The man in the hat held a flask, saying that without the water, everything would be much more difficult. They stopped at the stairs and the man asked, "Isn't that the top floor?" Black shadows were approaching them with a roar. The man held holy water and shouted for them to receive it. He threw the flask at the monster. It smashed on its head and a black shadow hit the man. He fell down the stairs. An orc in ghost form approached the others. Gerald, his mouth open, shouted that they were mutant ghosts and told them to draw their weapons. Many ghosts with green legs ran through the labyrinth. The man, his mouth open in terror, exclaimed that there were too many of them and they needed to run. They rushed down the stairs. A green hand held the cloth. Kurok, smiling, tore it off. Gerald hurried down the stairs. He looked back, wondering if they had escaped. Anna with her staff summoned light. It illuminated the dark tunnel. The man in the hat said it was a labyrinth, perfect for a minotaur. He looked at the wounded man and asked what had happened to Ouz. The other man silently shook his head. Gerald with a serious expression suggested leaving him here and going to the spring themselves, as he would be better off there. A group of fighters with a torch walked through the dungeon. Suddenly, the fighter in the hat sensed something. He turned around in fear and shouted to be careful. Several arrows flew at them. The fighters repelled the attack with their shields. Ferocious orcs rushed forward, screaming for the death of the strangers. A frightened Gerald declared that they needed to run. The boys retreat in horror. Arrows strike them and they fall to the ground. A fighter in a hat lifts them up, saying that if they fall, they will die. A group of people heads down the corridors. He, shocked, tries to figure out which way to run. Arrows land in front of them and stick into the walls. Gerald desperately shouts that they need to move to the right. Arrows land behind them, and he asks Anna to hold them back. The sorceress with the staff activates the ice world. The orc begins to chop at the barrier with an axe. Gerald, frightened, asks her to hold them back a little longer. A bright light appears in front of the girl, activating the ice world. An ice barrier appears in front of her. Skeletons aim their bows. An arrow pierces the leg of the fighter with the sword as well as his partner. They fall to the ground. Anna desperately activates an endless stream of light. The skeletons aiming their bows are shocked to see the glow. Their skulls shatter. Aaron moves forward. A swordsman screams loudly that something is happening to the wall. Suddenly, a torrent of water washes him away. Water fills the corridors and all the boys are in danger. Gerald begins to swim, screaming loudly in fear. Waves wash over everything around him. Anna lies on the ground and they beg her to wake up. The fighter in the hat points and asks to look. The sorceress looks on in surprise. They see a bright glow in front of them. The delighted girl says it is the source of life. Suddenly, her face becomes frightened, urging them to run immediately. The boys turn, perplexed by what is happening. A giant bull with an axe stands in front of them. He begins to bellow in rage, his eyes red. He drags his axe across the floor. They begin to run. Gerald, frightened, sees his eyes and hears that they are finished. He falls to the floor and the artifact lands next to him. Surprised, he remembers the words about holding 3 stones simultaneously. He shakes his head, realizing that he needs 100 gold pieces for each. A huge bull slowly approaches him. Then it suddenly begins to run, looking ferocious. Gerald screams in horror. Fighters appear before the monster and receive a powerful blow to the shield. They fly off. An ice arrow flies into its head. The enormous monster stands before a red-haired girl with a staff. It picks her up and lifts her off the ground. It slams her into the ground with all its might, and she screams in pain. Gerald, frightened, picks up a stone and asks where help is. The giant swings his weapon fiercely. The fighter in the hat covers his face in fear. Several knights with swords block its blow. The enraged bull feels the damage, drops its axe, and runs away. Arthur extends his hand, asking if everything is all right. Gerald, sitting on the ground, nervously asks if everything looks all right. The mustachioed man smiles and remarks that he actually saved his life. The source of life shines before them. Aaron plunges the flask into the magical water. He looks at her in surprise, sighing. Arthur, in armor, asks if they're coming. A group of knights walks away from the source of life. An orc sits next to a frightened bull. Rain drips from the dark sky. Gerald stands joyfully beneath it, shouting that they survived. 3 cloaked girls approach him. The astonished fighter asks what the priests are doing here. One of them, smiling, holds up a sheet of paper and declares that if he needs treatment, he can simply place his thumb on it. He examines the sheet. It states that the special treatment costs 300 gold pieces per person. They guarantee survival, but bear no responsibility for the consequences. If the full amount isn't paid after the contract is signed, the cost will increase by 50% monthly. And if the debt is not repaid, the body will become the property of the Duke for 10 years. Gerald carefully counts on his fingers, saying that until he pays the 300 gold pieces, he'll have to pay an additional 150 each month. The priest stands near the wounded and asks if he really will think while his comrades die. The man in the hat sighs despairingly. He presses his finger to the magical paper. Suddenly, a chest of coins appears. Kindness bows to the Duke, saying they've taken everything as ordered, including several slaves. Aaron, smiling, remarks that it was excellent work, all thanks to him and his trust. The old man stands before the chest of coins and asks if this really wasn't a dream. The Duke raises his hand and declares it's time to tackle the second dungeon. Shouts of understanding echo throughout the street. Workers are building a house. It's said that Aaron used the proceeds to improve the lives of the people living on his land. The remaining funds were used to build a city for adventurers. After a fruitful winter, they built this city called Aten. The Duke stands on a wooden tower in the center of the city. He looks ahead and reflects on how they built the city, but the problem with the human population remains. He seriously realizes that only orcs can live there. He sees a white bird before him. She tosses him a scroll which he immediately opens. It reads a letter about a gold mine being discovered on the border between the Count Grey and Amon, raising the possibility of a dispute over ownership. Aaron, smiling, realizes that if they don't have the men, they'll just have to recruit them. A disconcerted Rommel asks if there really will be a war. The Duke nods, claiming that a gold mine has been discovered on the border between the two counties and that he won't allow them to seize his territory. The aide desperately cries out that these lands are theirs only on paper, having long since been divided between Grey and Amma, and Aaron, with a serious expression, argues that this is why he wants to take advantage of the situation, asking if it's not the best time with both counts at odds. Rommel, sitting next to him, asks if the ruler is planning to wage war against both counties at once, given that their forces are 5 times their own and even far greater. The Duke calmly states that this territory is important to them and that the heads of those counties are Bran's vassals, meaning his. Cheryl, surprised, asks if this won't attract the Emperor's attention, as then he will definitely intervene. Aaron, closing his eyes, declares that he cannot intervene as long as his reasons are legitimate, and decides he is only waiting for his defeat. The old man sits in anger hearing about the problems in the army. Suddenly he slams his fists on the table and shouts at the Duke. The frightened man notices Cain. The old man, furious, declares that they must kill everyone who encroaches on the territory that rightfully belongs only to them. Confused, Aaron tries to speak. The man angrily holds his hand and assures him that it's not about the gold mine, but about their right to it. Aaron, shocked, pulls his hand away, hearing that he didn't do everything for profit and is ready to devote himself entirely. While he needs to concentrate on the war, the door suddenly opens, calling for the Duke. They turn around in shock. Arthur nervously announces that an urgent message has arrived, claiming Grey and Amon's armies are in front of the gold mine. Aaron, with a serious expression, understands that they must act now. He holds out his hand and orders Rommel to quickly gather the knights as they are heading straight there. Soldiers have gathered around the tent, and inside shouts can be heard about the enemy being a stupid idiot as he has owned this mountain for 10 years. The other shouts that they haven't even arrived yet, and this land already belonged to him. Grey and Amon push each other, shouting that one of them is a thick-headed egg as their ancestors owned this land. The enemy shouts that he is not an earl but a fish, as he shouted that he has owned it for only 10 years. The army approaches them. A golden crown is visible on the blue banner. The surprised soldiers realize it is the flag of Duke Bran. Grey and Amon are frightened and wonder why he is here. Aaron, on horseback clad in armor, stops. The Dukes swallow dust. Aaron, smiling, asks how they are doing. They bow in greeting. Aaron, furious, asks what they're doing on his land and tells them to get out of here. They are shocked by what he says. Aaron waves his hand and declares that according to the Emperor's decree, everything here belongs to him. One of the Dukes asks furiously. Another stops him. The man bows and assures them that this land has belonged to his ancestors since time immemorial. Because if the Duke insists it's his, they'll have a hard time. Aaron, enraged, draws his sword and asks how he dares to go against the royal family's word. All the fighters draw their blades. Cainus approaches them and asks why they don't try to negotiate. The counts are shocked to hear about the war. The man, with a slight smile, says he's heard rumors of their preparations. The Count, furious, shouts that it's their business alone. Aaron points a finger and claims that in that case they should join forces. He'll gather 1,000 warriors and the two of them will gather the same number, and if they win he'll take the land. The counts look at each other silently. One of them asks for time to think. They converse behind the tent about how the lands belong to the Duke. The law is clearly on his side. One of the counts, smirking, suggests shutting the idiot up and dividing the wealth between them. The bald one, smiling, declares that it's not a bad idea. They can take advantage of this opportunity and split everything produced by the mine equally. Cainus stands next to the Duke and says that judging by everything, they won't accept his offer. Aaron, smiling, tells him not to even think about it because their greed knows no bounds. The assistant looks at him and asks why he thinks so. Aaron holds out his hands and asserts that this isn't just a mine, but a huge gold mine. Then, in a quiet whisper, he tells him he spread that rumor. Cainus asks again, astonished, declaring that such a thing is impossible. Aaron smirks and declares that his original goal was these 2 villages and the gold mine was merely a trap. A month ago, Aaron stood with a letter. He holds it and reads that there are no conflicts between the counts. Losing his thoughts, He realizes they truly had no intention of starting a war. He begins to smile slightly, saying that if there wasn't one, then he needs to create one himself. He writes with the quill about spreading a rumor about a huge gold mine located between their lands. The counts stand before Eren. One of them agrees to these conditions, but also puts forward two of their own. First, they reserve the right to choose the territory. The war begins here, and he gets to choose the date. Eren calmly asks what else. The count places paper and quill, declaring that if they win, they demand ownership of this mountain and the exclusion of their territories from Brand County. The signed treaty will also be sent to the Emperor for certification. Eren, shocked, asks again about the certification. The counts exchange glances, thinking they've caught him off guard. One of them gestures, saying that without the Emperor's approval there can be no war. Eren, sitting opposite, begins to think. He picks up the quill and says that in that case everything will happen in a month. The men grin sarcastically, realizing his plans are over. Eren smiles as they realize he's literally informing the Emperor that he's giving them the land. The riders along with the Duke and his assistant gallop through the forest. Kindness, closing his eyes, says that although everything is going according to plan, problems are definitely inevitable. Eren turns around wondering what he's talking about. The man explains with a serious expression that even if they manage to gather warriors, they won't number more than 500. Furthermore, if the Emperor is informed of the war, he and Cheryl will have a difficult time. Eren, looking at him, agrees, stating that they can't even properly utilize the orc's power, specifying that he can ask Cain to look for mercenaries. The assistant nervously says that they should consider the fact that the gold mine doesn't exist. He supported them in the war, but if the old man learns the truth, it could disrupt the war. Eren introduces the angry old man and says they'll find a way to convince him. But for now, it's best to pretend ignorance. The man looks at the orange sky and hopes his younger sister has succeeded. The boys gallop forward to the castle. Guards point their spears at Eren, claiming that the Duke is gone and can get away. The elf, with a sad expression, asks to see the Duke. The frightened soldier stands at attention, hearing the question. What's going on? He notices that the master has returned. The girl turns around in surprise. Eren sits before her on a horse. She falls to her knees and cries for help, introducing herself as Kaisha, the chief elf's daughter. Eren, with a serious expression, asks why the elf dared to come here and ask for help, especially after they killed their people. A forest with tree houses is visible, and it is explained that the wood elves live in the far north of Bran, not far from the dragon's nest. They have always lived apart from other species, even humans, creating a semblance of another world in their village. A man with an arrow in his leg lies on the ground, and it is said that their method of defending the village is too militant, so much so that the people of Bran, even Eren, cannot forget it. The elf, with tears in her eyes, assures them that evil spirits have attacked them and are destroying the village. If they help them, she promises that the elves and humans will become friends. Eren considers the need to capture both the evil spirits and the elves and asks if she offers an alliance. Eren, with a serious face, insists he'll help, but an alliance won't be enough. The elf desperately says they have gold and will give it to them. Eren, with an air of importance, urges them to become official residents of the duchy's territory. Kaisha, kneeling in shock, asks again. Eren, with a serious expression, says that since she came she represents the interests of her people, so whether she agrees or not. The elf nervously says that even if she does she can hardly make such a decision. The Duke rides off on horseback, saying she can forget what she was told. The elf desperately shouts her agreement. Eren, smiling, declares that in that case they will sign the contract, so let her follow him. The dismayed council members hear about the Death Knight. Kaisha, trembling with fear, declares that it was indeed him, and that he has thousands of zombies and skeletons with him. Eren, with a serious look, thinks that perhaps this is the work of a demon, or a master necromancer. They need to hurry and save as many elves as possible. The Duke points his fingers and declares he gives them 3 hours to get ready. Rommel must gather the knights. Cecilia will take care of the priests. Bianca must be informed so the holy warriors can be ready, in kindness, and he will go to the orcs. Eren, looking stern, shouts that there is no time to waste. They must save the future inhabitants of Bran. Thousands of skeletons attack the elven village from the northern side of the dark forest. A huge fence lies before them. A sorceress with a staff begins casting spells. Plants entangle their legs. Skeletons with red eyes try to break through. The elf with a green staff declares that they must act now and fire. The mages point their staves skyward. A giant magical net flies through the air. It heads straight for the horde of skeletons. It falls on them and entangles them. The skeletons try to escape and fall to the ground. A Death Knight with flaming paws attacks. He picks up a mountain of skeletons and lifts them off the ground. His eyes are filled with red. Purple rays pierce this barrier. Thousands of bones fly up. The zombies run toward the fence. They pile on top of each other, trying to climb over. The sorceress nervously emits a stream of green energy. Shark trees fly forward. Vines grab the zombies. The skeletons grab onto giant shoots. They try to hold on to them. An elf stands behind the commander and nervously says that they need fire. She lowers her head and mentally apologizes to the spirits of the forest for this. In a rage, she declares total incineration. An explosion occurs, engulfing everything around. A fire is visible in front of the fence. Sparks fly everywhere. The Death Knight extends his hand and orders an attack. Hordes of zombies rush forward, growling and hissing with terrifying faces. Suddenly, their heads disperse. The scythe-wielding villain watches in shock. A giant dragon flies above him. Several dragons fly over the battlefield. Ropes are visible on their tails and someone orders holy water to be dropped. The mechanical dragons shoot water. It hits the undead who begin screaming in pain. Eren holds his sword and orders an attack. Their target is an elven village, and they must stay close together. The Duke's army, led by him, charges forward. They encounter the undead. The knights bravely wield their swords. The villain with red eyes turns around. He forms a purple ball of energy above himself, commanding the undead to rise. The zombies rise again under the influence of his magic. They ferociously charge at the riders. Bianca loudly orders the knights to form a shield block. The soldiers place their shields in front of them. She begins to glow, asking the goddess to grant them the power to overthrow their enemies. A powerful magical beam erupts from the sky. A bright flash occurs. The zombies stretch out their hands. Seeing the flash, a bright light fills everything around. They are incinerated by such a powerful attack. Rommel, enraged, screams about the Death Knight. He and his army rush to attack him. The villain sees him. A fighter holds a flaming sword. He gallops confidently while another throws something at the villain. A blue bottle flies towards the villain. Holy water scatters on him. Rommel, flying past, deftly cuts off his bony arm. Suddenly, his head falls from his shoulders. The zombies and skeletons look on in shock. Rommel, with an air of importance, shouts that the Death Knight is defeated. They can't stop. They must fight. Eren watches the battle unfold and says that as planned, they have stopped the advance of the undead. An aide stands next to the Duke who asks Kindness what to do next. The man with the fan declares that the Death Knight is simply a puppet. They need to kill the necromancer or demon that controlled him. If it was a demon, Cecilia would find it. Eren turns around and asks her if she heard what needs to be done. She pets her horse and assures him that she has already done everything. The surprised man says he understands her. The girl points and assures him that it is there. A purple light is visible on the mountain. The horned villain, enraged, calls them damned insects. Standing on a cliff, she screams that they don't even know how much time she wasted on the Death Knight. And now she's back to controlling everyone. She forms a purple sphere with her hands, summoning fallen souls to follow her heart. Her eyes glow, and she screams for them to fulfill her will. Suddenly, she receives a powerful blow to the head, her face contorting in pain. The girl falls to the ground, clutching her horned head and sighing from the damage she sustained. She's horned, seeing the tip of a sword in front of her. Eren points the weapon at her, declaring, "How dare he do this to his future people?" She jumps back sharply, her eyes filled with hatred, asking if the guy really called her that. In anger, she generates a clot of energy in her hands, calling him an idiot. She unleashes a powerful beam, wishing him dead. The stream of energy rushes toward Eren. He rushes forward. Using his sword, he deftly cuts through her attack. The astonished girl sees this. Suddenly, blood flows from her mouth. The Duke pompously declares that she has time to think before all the mana drains from her heart. The choice is to die or become a slave. The terrified necromancer kneels, unable to believe what he's saying. Eren's eyes blaze, certain this isn't human strength. Eren watches her closely and says that if she remains silent, it means she wants to die. The horned girl, kneeling, speaks his name. The Duke introduces himself calmly. She touches the tip of her sword with her claw and a sign appears. The succubus Elena, kneeling, vows her allegiance to him. A bright seal is visible on the blade. The elves look ahead, one of them shouting that the enemy is retreating. An army of undead is visible on the horizon, fleeing. The soldiers raise their spears, shouting that the evil spirits have been defeated. Kindness and the girls are riding on horseback. The man looks back and asks where the master is. He turns at the sound. Eren gallops on horseback, the succubus behind him, calling it good work. The assistant bows, asking about the demon. Eren, with a serious expression, declares that he didn't have time as she escaped before his arrival and will definitely not return anytime soon. Cecilia sees the girl behind him and asks who she is. The Duke dismounts and explains that he picked her up along the way. She was a demon's servant. The sorceress trembles and says that although she's not a demon, her aura is filled with evil. Cecilia confidently asserts that they must purify her. The frightened succubus is already forming energy in her hands. The Duke stands in front of his subordinate and declares that she will not do this. Cecilia, surprised, asks why. Aaron, frowning, says he'll explain later. For now, it's better not to. In her memories, she made a vow of submission. A mark was imprinted on the weapon. He pulled it out of her. The succubus cried out in pain. The surprised horned girl hears an order to force the evil spirits to retreat. The Duke standing before her hears the question that she doesn't need to destroy her army. Aaron calmly agrees, declaring that he will use them as he pleases. Cecilia, closing her eyes, says she understands. Aaron, smiling sheepishly, thanks her because right now his head is aching over many things. A group of elves approaches them, thanking them because without them they wouldn't have lasted a day. Aaron calmly declares that he merely fulfilled the terms of the contract. The elven commander, placing his hand on his heart, asserts that they will follow his example. The surprised Duke asks if this is true. The warrior seriously agrees, as elves always keep their word. Aaron takes out a piece of paper and exclaims that then they will easily become his subjects. The elves read what is written there in shock. Kaisha, kneeling, apologizes to her mother, saying that this is how the situation was. The red-haired guy, bowing his head, asks if they perhaps want to break the contract. The commander silently closes her eyes. She bends her knee, saying that they obey him, clarifying how to address him. Aaron seriously speaks of master, as all his subjects call him. The elves go to the gates. It is said that Aaron has received 1,500 who lost half their population to evil spirits. They walk through the streets. He says, "There is no one here." The Duke, closing his eyes, says he's glad to see them in the city of explorers. As they've noticed, there's a labor shortage here, and of course, they'll have to feed themselves. The elf turns to the child and says they only have enough food to get them started. The armored Duke pauses. The boy looks at her and says he'll offer a deal, asking if he should start with the good or the bad. The elf, perplexed, names the good. Aaron, with a serious expression, declares he'll provide 1,000 elves with a month's supply of food. The surprised commander asks what about the remaining 500 and whether that's the bad part of the deal. Aaron calmly declares he has a use for the rest, so he gives them a week to gather 500 elves and send them to his castle to serve. The shocked elf asks again. Aaron, smirking, says that judging by everything, all the offers in this deal are good. Aaron moves a chess piece. Smiling, he declares he's lost and most likely no one is more capable than His Highness in this game. The ruler laughs, declaring that the opponent is actually the absolute champion and that if he'd played at full strength, victory would have been his. An old man enters the room and says the king must attend a meeting. His vassals are waiting. The crown ruler says they only played once and would like to spend the day with a friend. If a formal presence is necessary, could an assistant fill in for him? The man declares that Count Grey and Amon are asking his permission to begin the war. The ruler waves him off, saying he should bring it, sign it, and let them fight to their heart's content. The interlocutor with a serious expression says that this time things are more serious as this war is encroaching on Duke Aaron's territory. The king with a stern expression asks about his nephew. His charge nods. The ruler rises from his chair. Standing before his friend, he says that the game will have to be postponed, and next time he should play at full strength. He turns and leaves. With a serious expression, he wonders if Aaron really wants to end things so badly. The king sits on the throne before the council. The king declares that he has heard about the war in Bran territory, asking if rumors have already reached every corner of the empire. He wants to know their opinion on the war. He looks at the gay-haired advisor who smirks. The representative of the imperial faction calmly states that Duke Aaron has every right to the discovered gold mine. So, the war petition must be approved. The representative of the neutral faction, shocked, shouts that this war will be unfavorable for Aaron because if they lose, the entire Bran territory will end. A gray-haired man asks sternly that war is against imperial law. Doesn't that mean they can refuse since they can't go against the law they themselves created? His opponent, closing his eyes, says he's right. In a memory from his deathbed, he was asked to protect children. The king smirks at him. He begins to rise from his throne and says his words make sense. But that's not enough to go against the law. The ruler confidently asserts his approval of this war and asks for the documents to be brought to him. He sits at a table holding a chess piece and allowing entry. The gray-haired man bows and says he has arrived as requested. The ruler, without taking his eyes off the piece, asks if the duke can read minds. Surprised, his charge asks what he means. The king smirks and says that during their conversation about war, the shocked man remains silent. The ruler, laughing loudly, declares himself so surprised when he said what was on his mind. For a duke who hasn't been in the imperial faction for very long, this is commendable. The subject laughs nervously. The king happily declares himself pleased to have someone who shares his intentions at his side. This is a great thing for the empire. The gay-haired man assures him that the ruler is flattering him. He merely expressed his opinion, primarily based on the law. They sit at the table and the ruler inquires about the outcome of the war, whether the counts will win or not. He hears with a serious expression that the counts will undoubtedly win. An army of 1,000 against 2,000 warriors. The king, lost in thought, says he has a bad feeling about this given Aaron's overconfidence in entering this war. The aide calmly declares that rumors are circulating that his vassal is a debt to Grey. He will advise the best way to repay the count. He continues confidently to say that 30 mercenary mages will reassure him that it will all be legal, and that the royal family will have nothing to do with it. The ruler looks at him and says that he really can read minds because that's how it will be. He begins to laugh loudly. With a sinister grin, he asserts that there will be enough mages